PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi.
Hello everyone and welcome back to round 6 of the Women's Candidates tournament. This was a very heated round with all decisive results in the women's section, and it was very hard to just pick one game for the analysis. But to me, the most fascinating and interesting game happened between Tan Zhongyi and Muzychuk Anna, which I want to share with you today. So before this game, they have played many times against each other, and their score was 9 draws, 3 wins for Zhongyi, and 2 wins for Anna. So we know this is going to be an extremely close match. Tan Zhongyi was playing as white, and she starts with d4, to which Anna replies with d5. Now, we saw Zhongyi trying a few different openings earlier, and this time she goes for an opening deviation once again, with the third move e3. We saw her play the Jobava London before. Now this is something different. This setup is usually called the Collet system. So Anna was probably a bit surprised here, but still goes for a very typical setup. Bishop to d3 and c5. So these positions are usually rather simple and they're very solid. And so far, there's a lot of ways that these positions can develop depending on what white or black does in the center. There can be a lot of pawn breakthroughs from both sides. There can be trades of this d pawn for the c5 pawn. And so far, it's very, very solid from both sides, and they didn't make any committal decisions yet. So here, white goes for castling, and then after b6, bishop to b2. One of the main ideas of this setup is to place the knight onto the e5 square, very strong square, and then potentially maybe open the center in the right moment and have a really nice bishop on the long diagonal. So black's plan is also very similar. They can also play in the center with moves like knight to e4. After they place bishop there, they can also make some decisions in the center. They can take on d4 themselves and just play on that way. So most of the game really decides itself in the middle game. Now, as we will see, this is very similar to what the players did in the game. Bishop b7, knight to d2. So just development so far. Very logical setup from both sides. Now, white goes for a3 to just prevent knight going to b4. Next, we saw bishop e7, knight e5, following through with the main plan. And now Anna deviates a little bit from the main line, and she takes on d4. So right away defining things in the center. Black's most common reply is to play castles, and then white has the option of either supporting the knight more with the pawn on f4 or maybe playing queen to f3, starting some sort of attack on the king side. But things change a little bit now that the pawn structure is defined. White takes back, and now knight takes on e5. So we see a trade of knights, and this might have been black's first slight inaccuracy that makes white's play a bit easier. Maybe she wanted to simplify a bit and have a more open position. I'm not sure what the exact plan was, but this is still not a critical inaccuracy. It just gives white's pieces more space and more options, as we will see. So after white recaptures, Anna retreats the knight onto d7, but the computer was really suggesting knight to e4 here as a much better option. But after checking this out a little, white has some very good options here where, for example, they give a check, and if black wants to save themselves from the check without moving the king, they have to play bishop here. And looking at this position and queen to g4 idea, we see that both pawns are attacked, and black's best shot is probably to just give up this pawn on e4, and playing this position is really not pleasant if you're just going to have to always worry about that e-pawn or just lose it like in this line. So something like this is really, really unpleasant, and it makes total sense that Anna retreated the knight to d7 instead if she saw this line and compared it with this move. But as we will see, Zhongyi now starts playing really good moves. She plays the best move, queen to g4, and grabs the initiative over the next course of the game. Here, Anna has to defend this pawn, and she plays g6. So She also could have castled instead. It's roughly equivalent to g6 because black will probably end up having to play g6 anyway. But in both of these lines, it's really starting to look kind of loose for the black king. And this was a very important moment where Zhongyi finds the best positional move in the game. I noticed this about her in this tournament, that she really pays a lot of attention to restricting her opponent's counterplay, which is one of her best qualities and why her attacks have been so dangerous in this tournament so far. And that's exactly what she does with her next move, b4. It is the best move in the position by far, and it is a very positional idea, just slowly restricting, taking away squares from the black pieces. And maybe she knew this idea from before, from just playing these structures, because she was playing very quickly at this point and has barely spent 5 minutes. Meanwhile, her opponent has spent about half an hour. Now, Anna goes for a5, tries to create some weaknesses on the queen side, which is a good strategy. Now, white just keeps improving the pieces with the knight, the rook joining the game, maybe preparing the potential rook lift, and black opens up the queen side and places the rook onto the a file. And we see that all of white's pieces are really looking towards the black king, aiming to start an attack, and her next move is very, very instructive. All of her pieces are pretty much on ideal squares, but black's pawn structure also looks pretty solid. So one way to loosen it up even more is to play h4, which is exactly the right plan to go for in this position. But Anna is going to always try to find counterplay, and she goes for rook to a4, so attacking this important pawn on b4. And this is asking white a serious question. Are you going to defend the pawn and slow down your attack a little bit, or will you just keep going forward and potentially sacrifice that pawn? And I'm not sure exactly what you would choose yourself in this situation, but if you have seen Tan Zhongyi's games so far, then you probably know that she is not the one to back down, and she actually sacrifices this pawn on b4 with her next move, h5. And this is absolutely the right decision in this type of position. But not only that, it's not just the pawn sacrifice. I initially thought that, okay, after Anna takes the pawn, which is what happened in the game, I thought she will cover with the bishop and then keep her attack going. But no, she actually covers with the knight and also sacrifices that bishop on b2. So it is not a complete sacrifice, because black taking here would actually just be a huge blunder. And the reason why black should not take the bishop is simply because white has a tactic that wins the game pretty much immediately with h takes g6, bishop takes on g6, f takes, queen takes, already not looking good for the king, but there's also just a concrete reason that after a few checks, there is knight to e6, targeting the queen, the rook, but most importantly, the mate on g7. So the queen will be lost from black, and this is why rook to b2 was not really possible in this position, but still interesting to keep the bishop undefended there. So now black goes to g5. So this was one of the only defensive tries left in this position, but Zhongyi stays super precise. She plays bishop to c3 and then f4, so trying to open up the position even more. The attack is looking very powerful now, should be winning for white with best play, but it is still not over, and we will actually see a comeback chance later in the game. But for now, white is dominating, playing really good moves. So just defending the bishop for now, knight to c5. Still, the advantage is on white's side, but she chose a bit of a riskier option with f5, even though f takes g5 would have been quite a bit stronger. So she goes f5 instead, and after takes, bishop takes. I mean, all of white's pieces are still looking very, very good. Great coordination between them, and she just needs to find a way to either checkmate or win some material here to make it worth it, which we know from the last round and from many of the attacks that sometimes this is hard when you do not have an exact, precise way to continue. But the tactics are just getting started. So she goes here for not the best line. She chooses h6, even though e6 immediately would have been much better. but she does play e6 just one move later. So just restricting the king for now, e6 comes along, and after now it's a pretty interesting moment. It's very tough to play for black. For example, if they play f takes e6, there's a really nice line here with rook takes, and after the bishop takes, already great position for white, and after king to h8, I don't know if you still remember this bishop right here, but it still exists, and it's actually going to become a beast in this position, and this is just game over for black. So that's just a line of how easily things can go wrong for black here. So instead, she decides to close it up with f6, and now was one of the key moments in the game. So if you want to try it out yourself, you can pause the video and think of what you would play here as white. So there's a few options here, and the best move is bishop takes on h7, which is great if you found it. It is the best way to continue in the position. Now, there's another way that is winning, but is not nearly as convincing, and it is knight to c6. And after rook takes queen, we take the queen back, but it's not as convincing. It's still winning because of that super strong pawn on e6, but still some work left to do for white. But bishop takes h7 is correct, and that just opens up the enemy king even more. So after the king takes queen to f5, there is still some calculation to do. If the king were to take here, then we simply have queen to h3, and then the knight can also join here and threaten a lot of things here. Rook h8 is not working because of knight to e7, and this is just winning for white, winning material, or just checkmating in some of these lines, honestly. So instead, in the game, king to h8, which makes sense. We're trying to save this king a little bit more in the corner, but now white finds the only move, knight to c6. This was an important detail in that bishop sacrifice variation that really makes it work. Now queen to e8 followed through, and once again, I don't know if you still remember that bishop, but it's been hiding the whole game and makes a comeback now and allows the white queen to use that pin on the long diagonal and take the pawn on g5 with a very serious checkmate threat. Now black plays rook to g8, and this was once again a very interesting moment of the game because white now plays a move that throws away the win. So Tan Zhongyi goes here for rook takes to f6. But instead, it is honestly a bit shocking that she doesn't take with the bishop, because this is apparently a completely winning line for white. But I did look into it a bit more because it looks so natural to take with the bishop. Why wouldn't you? But looking at it a bit farther, so after the opponent takes and king to h7, of course, the idea here is queen to f7 instead. And it looks like it's a great idea to just trade the queens. Black doesn't really have a choice. If they don't trade queens, then there's going to be h7 or any sort of other tactic that could work here. So after the trade, f takes here. And this is not as easy as it seems. It is still winning for white, but they have to find, first of all, rook e8. And after knight to e6, apparently there's only one winning move here, and it is knight to d8. So this might have slipped her mind, or maybe she didn't think it was worth the risk, because remember, white is still down a piece here. So if something goes wrong, if this doesn't work out, this could be a very bad endgame for them. So it was a bit of a risky, it's just a long calculation that the more I analyzed it, the more I understood why you wouldn't want to go for it. But if we get to the end of it, then it is winning for white here. And also with a curious move, not just taking the rook, but actually just promoting, because instead we can win a piece in this way. But as we see, it was not straightforward at all. There was a lot of calculation there. Knight to d8 was really key in that variation to really conclude that white is winning. So that's why she probably didn't take with the bishop on f6. Maybe there was a different move she was scared of, but instead she goes for a very surprising move. Rook takes f6. So, rook sacrifice, even queen sacrifice and all of that. So just a very surprising move. Black takes the rook, and after queen takes on f6, we have king to h7. And now, after knight to e7, which is a good continuation from white, making a lot of threats, the bishop and the queen are still a really dominant force on these dark squares, and black has only one defensive move. And Muzychuk here has under 2 minutes, so it's very hard to understand what is going on in this position. White is actually down a rook right now, but it is almost checkmate. So black has an amazing save with bishop takes on e6, which black didn't find in the game. And in all of these lines, for example, in the variation where white takes here, there is actually nothing better for white to do than to go for something like this with the queen check. And after black does this, we have to trade queens, and we end up being with equal material in most of these lines, and this endgame would have been equal. So this was black's best chance, and bishop to e6 was the only way to save it. Instead, she plays rook to e4, which looks good at first glance. You want to trade one of these attacking pieces, put more pressure on the e-pawn, but this wasn't working because it lets white regain material with a really nice tactic. So rook takes on e4, knight takes back on e4, and the tactic is that white can actually now not care about the queen being attacked, but take on g8. So now knight to f6 is going to run into knight f6, and we're going to win back that queen and be up a piece. And after queen to g8, which is what happened in the game, this is a winning position for white, and there's only one winning move, which is queen to f7, which she found in the game. And that was the final move of the game. Muzychuk resigned here, and this is completely winning because after black takes, we're going to take back with the pawn and just promote on the next move. There is no defense for black at all. So really a completely fascinating game, especially by the end. It is another very impressive and precise attack carried out by Tan Zhongyi, which we've seen her do before. And even though I am rooting for Anna, who is from my country, but we just have to admit that this was an amazing game by Zhongyi, who is currently the leader of the tournament with 4.5 out of 6 points. But it is very close, and all the other games were also decisive this round. So if we take a look at the results, Goryachkina defeated Salimova in a nice endgame, Leitingje won against Hampi also in an endgame, and Lagno won against Vaishali, which was essentially a game decided by one blunder. And as I said before, it is only getting more and more exciting from now on, so I hope you enjoyed the analysis, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye!